The market on Deck 9 smelled like burnt oil and something sweet Nora could not name. She stood at the top of the ramp and took a slow breath. After 6 months on a dusty relief posting at the edge of human space, even a crowded station market felt like a luxury. She was not a tall woman. She was not a loud one. She had short brown hair, a jacket repaired in 3 places, and the kind of eyes that moved constantly, not from nerves but from habit. Old habit, the kind that kept people alive. She came down a ramp. The market was long and narrow, stalls pressed close on both sides, vendors calling out prices in 4 or 5 languages. Keelians with pale, feathered necks. HFY in thick plaited coats. A few humans near the far wall. Nora knew the rhythm of places like this. Busy and loud, but alive. She was halfway down the row when the market changed. IT did not change loudly. That was the thing she noticed first. It went quiet the way a street goes quiet before rain, a slow and spreading hush, stalls folding in on themselves, vendors stepping back from their counters, eyes dropping. She slowed her walk without stopping. The far end of the row, for figures moved in a loose line. The one in front was HFY, big even for his species, with gray-green scales along his neck and arms that were too long for the rest of him. He walked like the market belonged to him, not in a hurry, not looking at anyone directly, just moving through the space with the total ease of someone who had never once been told no. His crew trailed behind. One was lean and fast-looking. 2 more were built wide. They were not hiding what they were. They stopped at a stall near the center of the row. It belonged to a young Celian, barely into adulthood by the look of the short feathers still coming in along the jaw. The stall had small handmade pieces on display, carved objects and woven panels, the kind of careful work that took time. The big HFY picked one up, turned it over, set it down hard enough that 2 others fell off the edge of the counter. The Celian reached out to steady the remaining pieces. His hands were trembling. The big HFY said something in a low voice. Nora was close enough now to hear the tone, but not all the words. She caught the phrase station fee. She had heard that phrase before. It meant nothing except that someone had decided they had the right to take from people who had less power than them. The Celian looked down at the counter. He reached under it and brought out a small credit chip. He placed it on the counter without looking up. The lean one behind the big HFY took the chip without pausing. The big HFY knocked 1 more piece off the counter, just to do it, and moved on. The market stayed quiet for another 10 seconds after they passed. Then, slowly, it began to breathe again. Vendors stepped back to their counters. Eyes came back up. Conversations restarted, quieter than before. Nobody said anything about what had just happened. Nora watched the group disappear through a side corridor. Then she looked back at the Celian stall. The young vendor was picking up the pieces from the floor, his movements careful and practiced. She found Derek near the tool exchange at the end of the row. He was broad, with grease on his forearms and the permanent squint of someone who worked in bad lighting. 3 years on this station. The closest thing Nora had to a friend out here. He greeted her with a handshake and led her to a small eating area behind 2 stalls. They sat with flatbread and something warm in cups, and he asked about her posting. She answered briefly. Then she asked about the group she had seen. Derek set down his cup. His voice dropped without him deciding to do it. The big one was Grax, he said. HFY ran a crew across Deck 7, 8, and 9. Have been doing it for 2 years. Station security knew. Counselor Yin knew. Commander Toval knew. Nobody had done anything because Grax was careful enough to stay below the level where action was required and generous enough with the people who could make his life difficult. 2 people had filed formal complaints in the last year. One had transferred off station suddenly. The other had simply stopped being around. Derek told her to leave it alone. He said it the way people say things when they have made peace with something they cannot change. He was not a coward. He just knew where the walls were. Nora nodded. She ate. She asked which corridor the crew used between Decks 8 and 9. He told her, then looked like he regretted it. She thanked him for the meal. Walking back through the market, she passed the young Celian stall again. The vendor had rearranged the remaining pieces to cover the gaps where things had been taken. The display looked almost normal if you did not know what it had looked like before. Nora slowed just enough to look at the work. It was careful and detailed, the kind made by someone who cared. She kept walking. That night, she took the long way back, through the corridor between decks 8 and 9. She moved slowly, counting doors and exits the way she once counted them in places where the walking itself was the dangerous part. She was not planning anything. She was just learning the ground. The corridor between decks 8 and 9 had no stalls in it, no vendors, no foot traffic after the market closed for the night cycle. Just pipes along the ceiling, a strip of pale light overhead, and the low hum of the station doing its quiet work. Nora was cutting through it on her way back from Derek's when she heard the sound, not shouting. That was the thing. It was almost worse than shouting. It was the sound of something small trying to make itself even smaller, a short, pressed breath, something between a gasp and an attempt at silence. She knew that sound. She had heard it in places where people were afraid to make noise because making noise made things worse. She turned the corner. The young Celian from the market stall was backed against the wall. His name, she would learn later, was Reen. Right now, he was just a thin figure with his arms pulled in close, trying to take up as little space as possible. In front of him stood Sol, the lean one from Grax's crew, and one other. Sol was not touching him. He did not need to. He was just standing close, in that particular way that people stand when they want someone to understand that touching could start at any moment. Nora stopped walking. She looked at the scene the way she looked at everything, steadily, taking it in without reacting to it yet. Then she walked forward and stepped between Reen and Sol. She did not run. She did not raise her voice. She simply moved into the space between them and stopped, and looked at Sol with the same expression she had worn all day, calm, present, and entirely unimpressed. She said, "That is enough." 2 words. No anger in them. No shake. The kind of voice that has been used in rooms where panic was spreading and someone needed it to stop. Sol stared at her. His head tilted slightly to one side, the way a person does when they see something that does not fit the pattern they expected. Humans on this station kept their heads down. Humans did not step in. This was a rule that had been established slowly and thoroughly over 2 years, and this small brown-haired woman had just walked into the middle of it and said 2 words like they were obvious. He told her to move. His voice was low and certain, with the weight of someone who had never had to ask twice. Nora did not move. He reached for her arm to remove her from the space. It was not even a hard grip, more the beginning of one, the kind used to steer someone who had made a mistake. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. She turned slightly, not stepping back, just turning, and his reaching hand found nothing where her arm had been. His weight shifted forward. She was already beside him, one hand on his wrist, the other guiding his elbow, and then he was on the floor. Not slammed, not thrown. Guided down, the way you guide a cart that has started to roll somewhere it should not go. He landed hard enough to know it had happened, but not hard enough to break anything. That he lay there for a moment, looking up at the ceiling, trying to understand what had occurred. Nora was already standing straight again. She looked at the second crew member, who had not moved, and who was now clearly trying to decide if he was in a situation that required him to act. The look she gave him was not threatening. It was patient. It said, "Make your choice, but understand that I have already made mine." He did not move. She turned to Reen, who was still pressed against the wall, his feathered neck pulled in, his eyes wide. She said, in the plain station trade language that most species on the lower decks shared, "Come on. I will walk with you." Reen looked at Sol on the floor, looked at Nora. Then he peeled himself off the wall and followed her. They walked out of the corridor together. Behind them, Sol sat up slowly. He said nothing. Nora walked Reen back to the area near his stall. She did not ask him questions. She did not tell him he was safe or that things would be different now, because she did not know that yet, and she did not say things she did not know. She just walked with him until he was somewhere familiar. At the entrance to the stall area, she stopped. Reen turned to look at her. He opened his mouth and closed it again. She said, "Go inside. Rest." He went. She stood in the empty market for a moment. The stalls were covered, the lights low. It smelled like the same burnt oil and that sweet thing she still could not name. She thought about what Derek had said, about the person who had transferred, about the one who had stopped being around. Then she thought about Sol's face when she had stepped between them. That particular look of someone encountering a rule they did not know existed. She had seen it before, in different places, on different faces. It never got old. She picked up her bag and started walking back toward the room Derek had arranged for her. By morning, the story had already moved through half the lower deck. She did not know that yet. She was asleep before the station's night cycle was half over, which was a skill she had learned in places where sleep was something you took when you could, because you never knew when the next chance would come. Derek found out about the corridor before Nora had finished her first cup of something hot the next morning. He came into his own workshop, looking like a man who had just been told the ceiling might fall, and stood across from her with his hands on the work table and said, "You put Soul on the floor." Nora was working on a portable scanner she had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. She did not look up. He reached for me. "Nora, Soul is Grax's second." "I know. Do you understand what that means?" "On this station." She set down the scanner and looked at him. Not defensively, not with drama. Just looked at him until he finished. He told her again, slower this time, the way people repeat things when they think the listener has not understood. He told her about Grax's reach, about the officials who kept things quiet, about what had happened to the 2 people who had made noise. She let him talk. When he was done, she said, "I need you to tell me something. The complaints that were filed, the ones that were buried. Who filed them, and where did they go?" Derek stared at her. "Did you hear anything I just said?" "Counselor Yin received them." "Yes." He sat down heavily. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then, quietly, he told her what he knew. Nora listened and remembered. She did not write anything down. She never wrote things down in places where writing could be found. There was a silence in the workshop after that, the comfortable kind that sits between 2 people who have known each other long enough not to fill it with noise. Derek asked, eventually, why she had stepped in. He said it carefully, not like an accusation, but like he genuinely needed to understand. She thought about it for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated, because she was deciding how much of it to say out loud. She had spent 6 years doing frontline medical work in human conflict areas. 3 of those years she had been embedded with alien medical teams during a cross-border outbreak crisis, the kind where the paperwork stopped being relevant, and what mattered was who was still standing and what they could carry. She had learned 4 languages badly and 2 languages well in that time. She had learned that pain translated across every species she had worked with clearly and without confusion. She had also learned what it looked like when someone decided that another person's pain was not their problem. She had watched it happen in corridors not unlike the one last night. She had walked past some of those situations herself, early on, before she understood what walking past cost. Not the person you left behind, that cost was obvious, but what it cost the person who kept walking. She did not say most of this to Derek. She said, "I have seen what happens when nobody acts. I'm not able to unknow that." He nodded. He did not argue further. Later that afternoon, Nora went to find Reen. His stall was open. He was working quietly, repairing one of the pieces from the floor. When he saw her, he went still. The way small animals go still, a breath held, a decision being made. She sat down on a crate near his stall, not blocking the exit, not standing over him, just sitting. She said she was not going to tell him what to do. She just wanted to know, if he was willing, how the arrangement with Grax worked. The schedule, the routes, which vendors paid and which ones had refused. Whether there were any officials he had seen Grax speak to personally. Reen did not answer immediately. She waited. She was very good at waiting. His sibling, Mir, appeared from behind a curtain at the back of the stall and looked at Nora with open suspicion. Mir was older, with the deeper feathering of an adult, and the kind of wariness that came from watching something bad happen to someone you loved and not being able to stop it. Nora looked at Mir and said, "I am not asking him to do anything. I'm asking him to tell me things." Mir said in accented trade language, "And then what?" Nora said, "Then I know them." It was not much of an answer, but it was an honest one, and Mir seemed to understand the difference between that and a promise, which was what everyone else had been giving them. Reen talked for a long time. Nora listened to all of it. When she left, she had a clear picture. Grax ran 3 decks with 4 collection routes. Soul handled 2. The schedule was regular enough to be predictable. 2 security officers were on informal payments. 1 docking official. Counselor Yun's office had received 3 complaints in 14 months, not 2 as Derek had thought. None of this was proof of anything that would move on its own. But Nora was not finished yet. On her way back, she passed a public communication terminal. She paused at it for a moment, reading the index of available external relay contacts. Then she walked on. There was one more thing she needed to do first. She needed to talk to Grax. The message reached Grax the same way all information reached him on the lower decks, through someone who owed someone who passed it along. A human woman wanted a meeting. The same one who had put Soul on the floor. Grax did not send back a refusal. He was curious that he held the meeting in a controlled lounge on Deck 7, a long, narrow room with one entrance that he owned because the man whose name was on the lease had stopped asking questions a year ago. He had 6 of his crew stationed inside. He sat at the far end of a table that was too big for the room, which was the point. He wanted distance. He wanted her to walk toward him. Nora walked in alone. She looked around the room once, not nervously, the way you look at a map. Then she crossed to the table and sat down across from him without being invited. She set nothing on the table. She had brought no bag. Grax studied her. Small, unremarkable. The kind of human who could stand in any corridor on any station in the galaxy and disappear into the background. He could not see what Soul had been afraid of. He began the way he always began, with weight. He filled the room with his size and his voice and the clear presence of the 6 crew members around them. He told her she had made a mistake. He told her this station had a certain way of working and she had put herself outside of it. He told her that could be corrected, either by her leaving on the next outbound ship or by other means, and that he was offering her the option to choose as a courtesy. He watched her face while he talked. He was looking for the thing he always saw, the small tightening around the eyes, the swallow, the hands pressing flat against the table, the body telling the truth even when the voice tried to be steady. Her face gave him nothing. She waited until he was finished. Then she leaned forward slightly, and she spoke. She said his name. She said Soul's name. She named the 2 security officers on his informal payment schedule and what they were paid. She named the docking official. She named Counselor Yun's 3 buried complaints and the dates they were filed and the names of the people who filed them. She said the name of the person who had transferred and the carrier they had left on. She said the name of the person who had stopped being around and what she thought had happened to them and where she had already sent that thought for formal review. She did not say any of this loudly. She said it the way a medic reads a chart to a patient. Here is what we found. Here is what it means. When she finished, the room was quiet. Grax looked at her for a long moment. He was a large creature with a long history of making problems disappear, and what he was feeling right now was something he had not felt in a long time. It took him a moment to find the word for it. The word was cornered. He made one last attempt. He told her that she was one person, alone, on a station where he had considerable influence, and that documents were unreliable things that had a way of going missing along with the people who sent them. Nora looked at him with those still, steady eyes. She said the documents had already left the station on 3 separate relays to 3 separate parties, with no connection to each other or to this station. She said she had done this before he sent scouts to find out who she was, which meant before this meeting, which meant the window in which any of this could have been stopped had already closed before she walked through the door. Then she said something he did not expect at all. She said she was not there to negotiate. She was not there to ask for anything. She had come because she wanted to be in the room when he understood that it was already done, and because she believed that people deserved to know clearly where they stood. She stood up. She thanked him for his time. She walked out. The door closed. 6 crew members looked at Grax. Soul, standing near the wall, said quietly, "Should we stop her?" Grax sat very still at the head of the too large table. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at the door, but he said nothing. There is a specific kind of silence that follows the moment when a thing that felt permanent begins to move. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It shows up in small details, a vendor who does not step back when a familiar shape comes down the row, a conversation that does not stop when the wrong person walks by. That silence settled over the lower decks of Galactic Concord Station the day after Nora walked out of Grax's room. Nora was not watching for it. She was busy. The 3 external relay contacts she had used were specific: a Galactic Trade Oversight Office, an alien rights documentation body that worked across 17 species, and a human diplomatic registry that was technically under Counselor Yun's oversight, but which reported to a body 2 levels above him. She had not picked them at random. She had picked them because she knew how bureaucracies worked, which ones moved slowly and which ones moved when properly lit. Counselor Yun's office received the first formal inquiry from the registry before the next morning cycle was over. Nora knew this because Derek told her, and Derek knew because one of his regular customers worked maintenance on the administrative level and had seen Yun in his office at a time when Yun was never usually there, walking back and forth with the look of a man who has just realized the room he is standing in has fewer exits than he thought. Yun summoned Nora at midday. His office was clean and arranged to communicate authority. He stood behind his desk rather than sitting, which Nora noted as the choice of someone who felt they needed the height. He told her, with controlled precision, that she had created a significant disruption, that the lower decks operated on a balance that took years to establish, that her unilateral actions had put that balance at risk and created a situation that would require careful management. Nora listened to all of it. Then she asked him how many vendors on the lower deck had reported property damage or goods taken without consent in the past year. He did not have a number, she told him. She also told him the estimated total credit value of what had been taken. She told him how many of those vendors had tried to file formal complaints and how many of those complaints had been redirected or closed without action. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse him directly. She simply read him the numbers the way she had read charts to patients, and then she waited for him to look at what they said. He sat down. She left. Over the following 2 days, small things shifted. A vendor on Deck 8 quietly refused a collection visit, and when no immediate response came, the vendor next door noticed. A human worker in station security passed a folder of informal observations to Yun's office without being asked. Reen and Mir filed a formal complaint that this time was logged and time-stamped and could not quietly disappear. Grax's operation was not built on force alone. It was built on certainty. The certainty that resistance was pointless, that anyone who pushed back would push back alone, and that the people with authority would always choose the easier option. The first crack was not the loudest thing in the world. But cracks do not need to be loud. They just need to be real. On the third day, Grax sent his full crew into the lower deck market during peak hours. Not to collect, just to be seen. He wanted the station to look at his people standing in that space and remember who it belonged to. He walked through the message to Nora himself. Not written, sent through the same chain that had carried every piece of information on those decks for 2 years. Come to the market. Come and see that nothing has changed. Nora went. When she arrived, Grax's crew was already there, spread across the center of the row, big and visible and loud. Vendors had moved back. A few had simply closed their stalls, but not all of them. Reen's stall was open. Mir stood behind the counter and did not look away. And at the center of the row, where the crew had spread out expecting empty space, Nora was already standing. Derek was next to her. Behind them, in ones and twos, others had stayed. A Celian vendor. 2 human workers from the lower level. An older, heavy woman who ran a food stall and had been paying Grax's fee for 18 months and who had apparently decided, this morning, that she was done. They were not an army. They were just people who had decided not to leave. Grax's crew looked at them. Then they looked back down the row at Grax, who had just arrived. He stood at the entrance to the market and looked at what was in front of him. His crew, and across from his crew, a human woman in a repaired jacket, standing in the middle of his market like she had always been there. The station watched. The market had a particular quality to it that Nora had not felt before in this place. It was not quiet the way it had been quiet when Grax walked through on that first day. That quiet was the quiet of held breath and turned eyes. This was different. This was the quiet of people choosing to stay. Grax walked forward. His crew held its position behind him. 6 of them, all larger than Nora, all with the practiced stillness of people who had used their size as a language for a long time. He stopped a few feet from her. He was tall and wide, and his gray-green scales had the particular color of something very old and very hard. He had built 2 years of control on this station through patience and through the careful, deliberate establishment of a single truth, that he could not be stopped by anyone here. It had been a true statement for a long time. He looked at her. He said, in a low voice meant only for her, that she had done something impressive, that she was smart and careful, and he could see that she had planned well. But smart and careful and well-planned had a limit on a station where she had no authority and no protection. And that limit was him standing in front of her right now, and she needed to understand that before this went further. Nora let him finish. Then she said quietly and without performance, "I have pulled people out of burning buildings with my bare hands. I have kept soldiers alive on tables made of crates. I have sat with people while they died and made sure they did not die alone. I have worked in places where you would not last a day. I'm not afraid of you." Grax stared at her. She was not saying it to impress him. She was saying it because it was true, and because she wanted him to understand the specific nature of the person he was standing in front of. Not someone who had decided to be brave today. Someone for whom this was simply what the situation required. From the corridor at the far end of the market, a different group entered. They wore the gray and blue of the External Oversight Authority, 8 of them, and they moved with the careful precision of people who had been briefed on the layout of the space. The lead officer was a Celian with the full adult feathering and the deliberate calm of someone whose job was administrative rather than dramatic. They were not there because of anything Nora had done that morning. They were there because the relay she had sent 3 days ago had moved through the correct offices and landed on the correct desks, and because 2 of Counselor Yun's own staff had submitted supporting documentation, and because the Human Diplomatic Registry had flagged the case as requiring in-person assessment. The lead officer read out a short formal statement. It named Grax and 4 members of his crew specifically. It named 2 station security officers. It named the docking official. It was precise and unapologetic, and it used the kind of language that came from forms that had been completed correctly. Grax's crew looked at him, and he did not tell them to run. He did not make a final dramatic statement. He simply looked at Nora one more time, with something complicated in his expression, something that was not quite anger and not quite respect, and then he nodded once to the lead officer and allowed himself to be processed. Bullies who feel untouchable always expect someone to stop them, eventually. What they do not expect is that the stopping has already happened days earlier, quietly, through the correct relays, before they ever had a chance to perform any last resistance. The arrests were orderly. The market stayed open. Commander Toval was called to the administrative level before the end of the day. Counselor Yun, who had spent 2 days making a decision about which way to face, had chosen correctly. The investigation into both of them would be slow and procedural and dull, which was how most real accountability worked. Later, when the oversight officers had gone and the market had returned to something like its regular noise, Nora sat on the same crate near Reen's stall, where she had sat 2 days ago. Reen's stall was fully open. The pieces on display were the clean ones, rearranged with care. Mir brought her something to eat without being asked, a small wrapped bundle of the same sweet-smelling thing that had been in the market air since the day she arrived. She tasted it. She still could not name it. It was very good. Derek sat beside her with his cup and did not say anything for a long time, which was one of the things she had always liked about him, but a young alien child, small and round-faced with the beginning of pale neck feathers, had been watching from the entrance of a nearby stall throughout all of it. As the crowd thinned, the child's parent picked them up and said something quietly in their language. Nora knew enough of that language to hear IT said, "That is what it looks like when someone has nothing left to prove." She finished the food. She thanked Mir. She stood up and picked up her bag. There were 3 more stations on her assigned route before the end of the quarter. She had a transit connection in 6 hours. She said goodbye to Derek at the ramp. He looked like he wanted to say something that would be the right thing to say, but could not find it. She saved him the trouble. She said the market is louder now. He listened to it for a moment. It was true. More voices. More noise. The particular sound of a place that had remembered it was allowed to be itself. He nodded. She went up the ramp and did not look back, not because she did not care, but because there was nothing left here that needed her. The work was done. The ground had shifted. The people who lived here would do the rest. That was always how it was supposed to end.